The day my rich uncle refused to help me, and it changed my life. I once asked my rich uncle for $10,000. Not to buy a car, not to start a crazy business. I needed it just to survive. But he looked straight at me and said something that made me furious. He said, "If I give you this money, I will destroy your future." At that moment, I thought he was heartless, but years later, I realized it was the best lesson anyone ever taught me about money. A few years ago, my life was a complete mess. Everything seemed to be falling apart at the same time. My bank account was almost empty, bills were piling up every week, rent was overdue, and my landlord had already warned me twice. My phone kept ringing from people I owed money. Every time it rang, my heart started beating faster because I knew it was another reminder that I had failed again. At that time, I had already tried several businesses. Each one started with excitement and hope, and each one ended in disappointment. Every failure left me with more debt and less confidence. But like many people who are struggling financially, I kept telling myself the same lie. I kept saying to myself that I just needed one more chance, just one more opportunity, and everything would finally work out. One night, I was sitting alone in my small apartment thinking about my situation. The lights were off, and the only thing glowing in the room was my phone screen. I opened my banking app and stared at the number in my account. It was painfully low. I remember thinking to myself that I had reached the bottom. That was when a thought suddenly entered my mind. My rich uncle. Everyone in our family knew he was successful. He owned properties in different cities. He invested in businesses. He traveled often. Whenever people talked about wealth in our family, his name always came up first. But there was also something else people said about him. They said he was very strict with money. In fact, many relatives complained that he rarely helped people financially. Still, I convinced myself that my situation was different. I told myself that if he really understood how desperate I was, he would help me. After all, I was his nephew. So I picked up my phone and called him. My hands were slightly shaking as the phone rang. I had not spoken to him in a long time. To my surprise, he answered quickly. His voice was calm and relaxed, like always. I explained briefly that I wanted to see him and talk about something important. After a short pause, he agreed to meet me the next day at a restaurant. The next afternoon, I arrived at the restaurant early. I was nervous and kept rehearsing what I would say in my head. When my uncle walked in, he looked exactly the same as always. Calm, simple, confident. He wasn't wearing expensive clothes, no flashy watch. If you saw him on the street, you would never guess he was wealthy. We ordered food and started talking about normal things, family, work, life. But the whole time, my mind was focused on the real reason I was there. Finally, I decided to say it. I took a deep breath and told him everything. I told him about my failed businesses. I told him about my debts. I told him about the stress and pressure I was feeling. Then I asked him the question that I had been preparing all day. "Uncle, can you lend me $10,000? For a moment, he said nothing. He simply leaned back in his chair and looked at me carefully. The silence felt longer than it probably was. My heart was beating fast as I waited for his answer. Finally, he spoke. He said one word: no. At first, I thought I had heard him wrong. $10,000 was almost nothing to him, yet he had just refused without hesitation. I felt a wave of anger and embarrassment rising inside me. I couldn't believe it. I stood up from my chair and said something like, "Wow, I didn't expect that from you." Just as I was about to leave, he calmly said two words: "Sit down." His voice wasn't loud, but it carried authority. Something about the way he said it made me sit back down. Then he leaned forward slightly and looked directly at me. What he said next was the beginning of a lesson I would never forget. He said, "If I give you this money today, I will destroy your future." That sentence shocked me even more than his refusal. How could giving me money destroy my future? I was the one drowning in problems. I was the one asking for help, yet he was acting like helping me would somehow hurt me. He continued speaking slowly. He said that if he gave me the money today, my problems would temporarily disappear. I would pay some of my debts. I would feel relieved for a while. Maybe I would even try another business again. But eventually, he said, the same cycle would repeat. Within a year, I would probably find myself in the exact same situation. Then he said something that made me uncomfortable because deep down I knew it was true. Your problem is not money, he said. Your problem is how you think about money. I didn't want to admit it, but I knew he had a point. I had never really studied money. I had never learned about investing. I had never built strong habits around discipline and financial responsibility. I had simply been chasing quick success. Then my uncle told me a story about his own past. When he was younger, he was extremely poor. At one point, he slept inside his car because he couldn't afford rent. He worked multiple jobs just to survive. Security guard, cleaner, taxi driver, anything he could find. Life was hard and progress was slow. One day, during those difficult years, he approached a wealthy businessman and asked for financial help. He believed that one loan could change his life, but the businessman refused. My uncle said he was angry at the time, just like I was angry with him. But years later, he realized something powerful. That refusal forced him to change. It forced him to learn. It forced him to develop discipline and skills. Then my uncle said something that completely changed my perspective. He said, "Money doesn't solve problems. Money reveals them." If someone is irresponsible with money, giving them more money will only make the situation worse. If someone is lazy, money will make them comfortable staying lazy. If someone avoids learning, money will help them avoid learning even longer. Then he asked me a question I couldn't answer. How many books about money have you read? The answer was 0. Then he asked another question. How many successful people do you spend time learning from? Again, I had no answer. That's when he made me an unexpected offer. Instead of giving me money, he offered to teach me. He said that for the next 12 months, he would guide me. He would recommend books. He would challenge the way I thought. He would show me how wealthy people actually think about money. But there was one condition. He would not give me a single dollar. At first, the idea sounded disappointing. I needed money immediately, not lessons. But then he said something surprising. If after 12 months you still need the $10,000, I will give you $20,000. I agreed to the challenge, and that decision changed everything. The next year was one of the hardest years of my life. I had to face uncomfortable truths about myself. I had to stop blaming circumstances and start improving my habits. I began reading books about money and business. I started studying how successful people think and operate. Slowly, my mindset began to shift. I stopped looking for quick shortcuts. Instead, I focused on building skills and discipline. I learned how to identify opportunities and create value. About 10 months later, something surprising happened. I no longer needed the money, not because I had suddenly become rich, but because I had developed the ability to create income and opportunities for myself. One day, my phone rang. It was my uncle. He asked me a simple question. Do you still need that $10,000? I smiled and said no. He laughed too. Then he said something I will never forget. If I gave you that money that day, you would still be the same person. But now, You are someone who can create money, and that's the difference. Anyone can receive money, but very few people know how to build wealth. So the next time life refuses to give you something, don't always see it as rejection. Sometimes it's preparation, because the greatest gift someone can give you is not money. It's the knowledge to never need it again. If this story changed the way you think about money, subscribe to this channel, because every week I share more lessons from my rich uncle that changed my life forever.